Well, we have made it. It is the end of 2023, at least at the recording of this episode. There's a few hours to go. I like to think there will be a few hours to go by the time we put it up, but I just want to make sure that was made clear while we were filming it. But as we get ready for it, we are also less than 24 hours away from the college football playoff, the Rose Bowl, the Sugar Bowl. We're also a little less than 24 hours removed from the Orange Bowl, the matchup of the rejects of the college football playoff, the Georgia Bulldogs and the Florida State Seminoles. One team went out there and said, we just want to make a statement that we should have maybe have been in the college football playoff. The other one went and said, we give up. It does not matter if this team had opt-outs. I'm just throwing my opinion out there first before we let Mr. Kapke here go and just absolutely go on his thought of the year. Mr. Josh.
Mr. Harrison.
I'm trying to think. If Florida State had their stars in this game, how much better would it have really have been? For a team that gave up 63 points and only scored 3.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine a situation where the starters come in and they score 40 fewer, or they give up 40 fewer points and score maybe another 35. I just can't see a situation like that. And also, where is the depth? Is there, once you remove the starters, is it just that's all that is left for this team? Knowing some guys, some key members of this offense and the defense might be going to the draft this year? And again, I know other recruits are coming in next year. There's always fresh talent, especially for a team that went 12-0 this year. Some guys who are rated 4 stars or higher are going to want to go to this program. However, in any situation, are you telling me these backups on Florida State, a team that went 12-0, are really only good enough to give up more points than Vanderbilt, more points than Ball State, more points than Tennessee Martin? Think about it. I'm thinking of comparable talent at this point. Scored fewer points. Remember, Vanderbilt got to double-digit points. UT Martin scored a touchdown. Think of this. Florida State did none of that. Something about this is not right when it comes to making the claim that they should have been in the college football playoff.
Yeah, and I mean, guess what? All those hypotheticals you threw out there, Florida State rested their starters so we couldn't discuss those hypotheticals, at least in their eyes. We're not allowed to assume that Georgia would have beat their starters because, hey, they made it known to the world that they weren't going to play their guys, and also that they weren't really going to play. That's one of the reasons that they got beat as bad as they did. Not only their starters didn't play, but you just didn't see any energy from anybody on that team. Nobody wanted to be there. And you look at the other side and you look at Georgia's sideline and you look at that program and you look what they've built in the past 5 to 7 years under Kirby Smart. And if you see the two coaches, Mike Norvell on one end, Kirby Smart on the other end, there's a coach on that one on those two sidelines that has multiple national championships and a whole bunch more as an assistant at Alabama, and that's Kirby Smart. If I was a recruit, which culture would I want to be a part of? Would I want to be a part of, oh, we're going to go out there and play because you play to win the game, as Herm Edwards would like to say? Or are we just not going to show up because we feel like we have no longer anything else to prove? Let me pivot to this. The day that Florida State got left out of the playoff, I admit, listen, they were robbed in the terms of like they did everything that they could do. It was not their fault that they didn't get in. It was out of their control. It was more their reality than their fault. And Jordan Travis made this statement, and everyone was behind him. And everybody from Florida State backed him. And he said, I wish the committee could have seen that this team was more than its quarterback. And this entire roster, the coaching staff, all these players that Jordan Travis stuck up for, talking about this is a much better team than just me. They could have gone out there and said, you know what? We're going to play this game for Jordan Travis. We are going to prove him right. And instead, they decided that they weren't going to care. And that's why they got beat as bad as they did. Not just because they didn't play their starters, but because the players that they did play were also just disconnected from the game. And if you look at the overall body language from Florida State, it was giving off, we don't want to be there. We're not going to play in this consolation game. We feel like we have nothing else to prove. And that was the road that they took. But you know what? That's why you have these different programs that have these different cultures. I'm not going to go all the way as far as to say that Florida State has a trash culture, but you can see what a winning culture looks like, and that's what Georgia put on display in the Orange Bowl. They also got left out of the playoff. They could have done the same thing. And if you go back, there was one year in the college football playoff where Alabama was a one-loss team, and they didn't even make the SEC championship, and they got in the playoff, and they won the whole thing. Georgia was coming off of 29 straight victories. Florida State had not won 29 games in a row, much less play that many SEC opponents. And they had one 3-point loss to which, who I think Alabama is the best team in college football. That's up for debate. They had one loss by 3 points at a neutral site, and they go from first to outside the top 4. They had every right just to be as angry about not getting in. But when circumstances come your way, you have options in how to handle those things. Florida State decided they were going to handle it their way, and UGA decided they were going to handle it like grown-ups. And that's the difference between those two programs. That's why you see a top 5-star safety like KJ Bolden flip his commitment from Florida State to Georgia, which, by the way, I think he made one of the best decisions of his life. And for those out there that know where I come from and where I stand on this rivalry, I'm a Gator fan. I'm more of an anti-Georgia person than Florida State. Harrison on the other side can vouch for that all day. We've had these debates.
Yes, and I'm the flip side where I am the anti-Florida State more than Georgia. Right. And by the way, I was at the Orange Bowl, so yeah. I had a great time.
Yeah, right. And I will say this, even though I say what I say, and I still stand on my argument that Georgia's the bigger rival and all that, my respect for Georgia is way higher today than it is for Florida State. That's just my opinion.
Agreed.
And that's where I stand on the matter, because you know what? They decided, even though they were left out of the playoff, that they were going to play this game. And it just kind of like, it gives you this kind of feeling where it's like, you know, your quarterback just stood up for you guys. Your quarterback just stood up for your team. And to not go out there and prove him right, it's just, you know, I don't really know what the word is for it, but it's tough to look at. It really is, because you say you support them, but then you don't even go out and play the game. You know, that's their choice. People gave UCF all this heat. They were undefeated. They got left out of the college football playoff, but UCF went and played their bowl game, and they at least had us look in the mirror where it's like, hey, they beat a really good Auburn team. They were unbeaten. Maybe we should have looked at them a little bit more seriously. Liberty, I mean, they had their bowl game today. I actually didn't get the time to check the score, but I imagine that their starters played in the bowl game, or at least a bunch of those guys did, and they went undefeated, and they didn't get in. And for FSU to go out there and say, well, you know what, it's different because, you know, we should have been in, and there's no outcry for UCF or at Liberty because of the different conferences, then you're admitting that other conferences can be better than others. Some can be better than others. And from before the season, for you guys to get up there and talk about the ACC and say that you guys are far better than the ACC, which appeared to be the case this year, and then you want out of the ACC, you can't then go and say, well, we should have been in the playoff because our conference is as legitimate as the other conferences. That to me is why you didn't get in, because your conference isn't as good as the SEC or the Big Ten, or even in this matter this year, the Pac-12. That's why you didn't get in, but you decided to go at your conference instead, but then you're upset when you get left out because you thought you played a legitimate schedule and had nothing else to prove. That's what I have to say.
And the thing about it, too, is when you're a team that is trying to show that you are as good as those teams in the SEC. And then you go out there and you play like an FCS team. What are you proving to anybody? What are you proving by showing up and saying, we're just going to make this miserable? Georgia's just going to say, okay, we'll be the SEC team that destroys you. It just doesn't make sense. I remember seeing all the stuff online. There was never anything official that said this would happen. But the idea of like FSU should just not take the bid. With the way they showed up, I almost feel like they really shouldn't have.
They shouldn't have taken it.
If they really feel like they need to protest the idea of not making the college football playoff, going into a major bowl, what feels like was simply for the payouts, for the conference. Remember, it's a conference payouts. What are they proving? Just go send Louisville. They would show up for it. I don't care if they just lost the ACC championship. If FSU goes to the playoff, they're the ones in the Orange Bowl anyway because of tie-ins. Send a team that is going to show up. It doesn't matter how badly they might have also have lost to Georgia. Louisville would have scored more than 3 points.
Yeah, because they would have played. And for the record, I also want to just make this clear. I have no problem with players wanting to sit out the bowl game.
I don't either. It's how it was done in this manner.
Exactly. It's exactly. Like, for example, Georgia, Brock Bowers didn't play. And for example, like Florida State, I looked at the mock drafts, who's supposed to go where. Keon Coleman isn't going to gain much from playing this game. He's a mid-first round pick. He's not going to move up by playing this game. If Keon Coleman's like, hey, I want to sit out because I'm going to be drafted high, that's fine. Outside of maybe Jared Verse, outside of him on that Florida State roster, everybody had something that they could have proved in that game to either boost their draft stock, to get better for next year. I understand if you're sitting out because you're a high draft pick.
Right. And NFL teams prefer if you sit out.
Yeah.
Look what happened. And I know this isn't a wide receiver example because we're talking Keon Coleman.
Right.
I used to be a much bigger critic of players sitting out. And then Matt Corral went into the Sugar Bowl and hurt his knee. That completely wrecked his draft stock. We have not heard from him again. He was originally supposed to be a first-round pick, all that. And the second he left the game, I told myself, I get it now. But we're talking about individual circumstances. This is not a lot of these guys. Like, what happens if you opt out? You go from 7th round to 6th round by going and preparing for the draft, or maybe an undrafted player remains undrafted. And if you're an NFL team, Josh, and you see a bunch of guys who are just simply bailing out of protest, just going into a major game. Remember, this is still a postseason game that's supposed to mean something, even if the college football playoff has dampened that. Being in a big bowl game still means something. It's supposed to be. It should never not. But if you're an NFL team and you see these guys go lackadaisical into this, do I want you on my team?
And I also just want to say this too. It's not even it's like a combination of like how it was all done, right? So like obviously you had a number of opt-outs, some of them justified, maybe some of them maybe I can't. But also the players that are on the field. Like if you're going to play, then play. Like don't just be on the field and then not commit to playing the game. So like that's also something I wanted to highlight here. I'm not gonna like just like pick on all the people that are on the sideline that decided we're gonna protest and sit out. There were players that were like, they decided, hey, we're gonna play, but we're not gonna play. We're gonna make that statement on the field instead. So it's like it's just one of those things where it just the whole thing was just like, listen, I understand you got screwed in life. People get screwed. Georgia also got screwed. They didn't handle it like this. And that's a locker room full of champions in there, multiple time champions. And they went out there and they played the game. And the guys that didn't had reasons why they didn't play the game. Bowers actually wasn't even an official opt-out, by the way. He was just not cleared to play.
Yeah, exactly. He was just not cleared to play.
Exactly. And like Georgia they could have done the exact same thing. They could have been like, well, we just won 2 national championships. What does this game have to
Georgia literally has nothing to prove.
Nothing to prove.
Florida State is the team that has nothing to prove. Like, think about it. The team that has nothing to prove showed up, and the team that has everything to prove didn't. There's something wrong there.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, we can talk about it all day. And like for Florida State fans to be like, well, but Georgia had a loss and we didn't. Well, what was that for Florida State? Their third SEC game of the season or the fourth? Like, if you want to switch into another conference, you're gonna have to play more than four of those. And the fact that you didn't even want to play a fourth one, I don't know if you're gonna play all eight. So this idea that like it's back to the conference argument thing again, in which we would go back and forth and circle onwards and onwards and onwards. But it's just one of those things where you look at these teams. One team decided they were going to take this seriously. The other team decided they weren't. And honestly, it's even unfortunate for all the people that actually work the Orange Bowl that spend like all year working on this, and one
That
team
too.
that too. So it's like it's done. We could have seen this coming a mile away, but the idea of Florida State fans running on the social media saying, well, we can't justify this as them not being allowed in the playoff because they didn't have their starters out there is the biggest schoolyard childish energy of when you're playing a little schoolyard football game and your team is beating the other kid's team and they're just looking at you and saying, well, we're not even trying type energy. That's what they were doing yesterday. And I mean, again, if I was a high school recruit and I was looking at my options, I just saw two completely different programs on each side of that football field, and I know where I would want to be going. And I'm a Gator, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, and another thing too, I want to build upon it. Let's say you're one of the players who did participate. You chose to not care and maybe decide to transfer this offseason. Who's going to want to take you? Because you just participated. You just basically said that if I'm not happy with how things went, I'm not going to care. A lot of programs don't like that. Or let's say you want to play at FSU this next year. Let's say you chose to show up and you maybe hadn't quite impressed Mike Norvell yet. But here's finally the chance you do. He has that in mind when you show up for all the programs in the summer, getting ready for fall, and maybe you get more playing time the next year. You missed that opportunity because you wanted to be spiteful. And even if Mike Norvell, the coach, is totally fine with you doing it, he's still never going to see that hypothetical moment where that player showed up and got to be a big member of this team because it was all about not showing up. There's so many missed opportunities for whether you're actually someone who played, someone who opted out, you're a member of the Orange Bowl committee or the coaching staff or anything. Even then, look, think of a coach. Let's say you're a linebackers coach on this team, and you're trying to show that your coaching will be a difference maker. Your team just gave up 63 points. You're not going to go impress anybody. Because remember, too, even if that was the case, keep this in mind. Most people are going to look at the fact that this team gave up 63, scored only 6. So remember, if you're an offensive coach here, too, everyone's going to look at that. And if you say, oh, well, we didn't show up, and it's like, well, why didn't you make your players show up? I don't get it, man. There was no incentive to not show up.
Yeah, and I think, and the other thing I wanted to point out too, for anybody that would say along the lines of, well, there's been other teams that have had a number of starters not play and basically not play in their bowl game. Those other teams also aren't pounding their chest and pounding the table saying they're one of the 4 best teams and then doing that. We have that's part of the
Right.
that's part of the situation here that I think kind of gets me fired up per se, where it's like you've been talking about it for a month that you guys were, you got shafted from the playoff. Well, Georgia also got shafted. They haven't said much compared to what Florida State's been saying. And now is your opportunity to go out there and how's look and be like, you know what? We were wrong. And you know what? I could have Florida State went out there and beat Georgia and played their guys and actually beat that team. Because for the record, I thought Georgia should have been in the playoff along with Alabama. I thought they were one of the 4 best teams. If Florida State goes in that Orange Bowl and actually plays their guys and beats Georgia, I would have come up on here and I would have admitted I was 100% wrong about.
I'm in here. admitting I'm wrong about Florida State. When the playoff snub, as I'm now putting in quotation marks, first happened, I came in on this podcast and said Florida State should be in the college football playoff. This is me coming in and saying I was wrong. I want to make that clear, everybody. I was wrong. The one time I came out here and gave one of the teams that makes me angry all the benefit of the doubt. They go and gave me a reason to go say I was wrong.
Well, you almost made it through 2023 without being wrong. So look at it that way. I mean, that's a pretty good streak.
I don't think I necessarily went all of 2023 without being wrong about something.
Oh, I did. I was never wrong. Oh man.
What do you mean? You were
I'm playing. Yeah.
what was our Stanley Cup predictions in the earliest episodes of this? We went Carolina, Edmonton, or something like that.
The worst one that I've had on here by a mile, and it's not even remotely close, was I decided I was gonna get cute and go with a bold prediction where Denver was gonna beat Miami, and Mike McDaniel's like, hold my beer, 70 points. Yeah, I think Miami's the real deal.
Yeah, I think those are our two biggest blunders on here. That's how you knew we were new to this podcast thing. We're just going in there and saying, oh yeah, we're going to make these big, bold predictions and then talk about them afterwards. And we also drank the Kool-Aid on the idea that the Gators would make it a game against Georgia.
Yeah, we did. That was also, I don't know how I deluded myself into that. It's like the meme where it's like, I don't know, it never works for everyone else, but it might work for us. It might work for it's like it's one of those things where like that's crazy. We did those picks. I'm not doing that again.
No. But
yeah.
That's it for the Orange Bowl talk. We are moving on to the actual college football playoff, the top 4. And listen, the Orange Bowl is still going to be relevant as these games are being played. Anyone is going to find – there's going to be someone out there who's going to take the fact that Georgia just won by 60. If any of these 4 teams go in and get demolished, there's going to be an argument immediately, regardless of whether or not it is a fair argument to say Bama beat Georgia, they get in, Georgia doesn't. That is at least a fair argument where the team that won the SEC got in. Fair. I just want to make that clear. And plus Georgia lost all that stuff, even if Georgia probably could have still been a playoff team like when they lost to Alabama 2 years ago. There's a precedent to keep them in. But if any of these teams lose, there is going to be an argument for Georgia. Oh, well, with Georgia, let's just example. Let's just say Texas gets smacked by Washington in the Sugar Bowl. Let's just say it happens. And someone just goes and says, oh, well, Georgia put up a fight against Alabama, who's now in the Rose Bowl. Then you have, well, perhaps they would have been a team that was capable of putting up a fight against Washington because Georgia put up the fight against Alabama. But Texas showed that their game against Alabama was earlier in the year, so it's more of a fluke. You get where the logic is coming. It might not make total sense. I'm going to admit that now. But these are the type of arguments people are going to make if a loss like that happens.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, we talk about like how I just went on this rant about how Florida State could have proven me wrong with the big win and the Orange Bowl. Maybe they should have been in the playoff. I also, with that being said, like I do think that like teams can do something like that, like UCF did against Auburn, where it's like, oh, maybe we should have looked at them more closely. I don't know if like, we look at these games and we see how they unfold, and it's funny because we do it every year with the college football playoff, especially where there's usually typically a one blowout game, whichever one it might be. And then you kind of look at the rankings and you're like, oh, this team probably should have been in over this team. They would have given them a better game. Yeah. The thing is you can't select that way. You can't select after the fact. So whether they got it right or they got it wrong, I don't know.
What's done is done. But the point is that's where the debate's going to continue.
Right.
even if the actual Orange Bowl game itself is done. But like I
Also,
said, we're on to the college football playoff.
right.
Washington versus Texas in the Sugar Bowl. Michigan versus Alabama in the Rose Bowl. I'm not going to lie. Michigan, Alabama. This is a matchup that I think if you're not excited for this one, you're not a college football playoff fan. Two of the biggest brands facing off in the granddaddy of them all. It's going to be an electric atmosphere.
And to me, this might be a hot take, but the Rose Bowl is just one of those games where it does not matter what teams are playing. I am watching because
Exactly.
it's the Rose Bowl, and it's got this weird twist to it, obviously, this year because it's back in the playoff. It's not the usual Big Ten, rest in peace Pac-12 tie-in. It's going to be an SEC team. Something magical about an SEC team in the Rose Bowl. It's pretty cool. Bama, I think, obviously, if you look at those matchups. I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to sit here and make picks on like Alabama, Michigan, or Texas and Washington. I'm just going to come out and say that I think that out of these four teams that are left, I think Bama is going to be holding the national championship trophy overall. Whoever wins Texas and Washington, that's on them. It could go one of two. It really could go either way. I think Bama's the best team left out there on the field. And again, I will also make the point again that if Georgia was in this four-team field, that they would also beat all of these teams. So, but again, I think Bama probably is going to come out of this. But the Rose Bowl is just such an exciting game to watch. You take a trip down memory lane of some of the better Rose Bowls. Obviously, the Vince Young iconic classic game against USC. But of course, one of my favorites was Oregon FSU in 2014, the inaugural year of the college football playoff, and Marcus Mariota put on a clinic. And
That
for
was
those of
quite the game, wasn't it? Against
and I
Florida
know,
State.
yeah, and I know this is mutually exclusive, but we've seen what an undefeated Florida State does in the college football playoff. Yeah, it wasn't that good. I know it was a different team, but a lot of people would even say that team was better than the team they have now. So I just wanted to
It
put that
was
out.
better than the team they have now.
Wanted to put that out there. But
Just
yeah,
think of all the NFL talent that came out of that team.
literally,
Regardless of how they actually played in the NFL.
yeah, a lot
It's
of
all
them.
about the fact that what it produced.
Oh yeah,
Like then it's a quantity thing a lot of the time.
yeah.
But even if Alabama comes out of it, Michigan's still going to make a huge game out of it.
They
They
could.
have they have a lot. They have a chip on their shoulder. It's really weird to say, but hear me out. They spent pretty much the entire year second behind Georgia because Georgia was the defending national champion. They were number one to start the year, so they stayed number one until they lost. Michigan, no matter how many teams they blew out, was stuck in number two. They would gain votes for first place over time, depending, as the year went on, but they were stuck in second. Then, they finally go beat like a Penn State. They beat Ohio State. They're number one now going into the playoff. And yes, you also have it where Jim Harbaugh did not get to play the last three games. And they still had a big win against the rival. Now they want to go in there, now that they have everybody back, and show they can go beat Bama in the bowl game that is for their conference. They have a lot to show here, especially because they have not won a bowl game yet in the years they have made the college football playoff. So this is for them, their chance to really show up and make some noise. And even if Alabama wins, it's not going to be by more than a score, more than a touchdown. You're in for a real deal classic here. In Alabama, and I know Michigan's a chip on his shoulder, Alabama is trying to prove something too. This is like 2015 all over again. They took that one rough loss early in the season, and now they're trying to run the table and win it all and prove that one loss was not who they are. That's when you get the best games. You have two teams that show up trying to prove something. And yes, I know it's in the playoff. It's not the Orange Bowl. But a lot of teams still make the playoff and then they don't show up. Whether they might have intended to, but then they don't. But both these teams have that little extra juice to push it. Now, when it comes to the Sugar Bowl, I got Washington over Texas.
Yeah, Vegas has Texas by 4, but I think, yeah, I mean, that game is as big of a coin toss to me as I've continued to see all year, I feel like. I mean, Washington, I don't know what it is about Washington. I saw them beat Oregon
I
in the
feel
regular.
like they're almost just not favored because they're a smaller brand.
It's
Just
it
be like look at who they beat this year.
Yeah, I mean, look at and it's crazy though because Washington typically, if I'm going to make a case for a college football team, I start with I like to be the strength of schedule guy. I talk about who did you play, who did you beat. Well,
I'm just gonna
Washington,
interrupt this episode for a moment. Just mention, I think I hear fireworks outside. That's how you know it's New Year's, my friends. In case you hear popping sounds, I just want everyone to know these are fireworks.
oh, that's what that was. Oh, okay, that's what that was. Okay, I'm relieved. No, but I look at Washington's schedule, and I've been talking about the Pac-12 most of the year and how Pac-12 actually in their farewell season is arguably one of the strongest conferences this year. And Washington, if they had had a loss, I would have been like, well, that conference was still a gauntlet to go through. I can forgive them for
Exactly.
losing the game. They didn't lose to anybody. But I don't know what it is with this Washington team. They lost. They beat Oregon in the regular season, and I watch Oregon, and I'm like, oh no, Oregon's better. Oregon's better. And then they play again, and they beat Oregon again, and I'm like, I don't know. I feel like Oregon's still a better team, but I feel like Washington, like
Even
it's
if they're, but it just shows Washington is a team that
yeah,
will rise to the occasion and beat the better team.
and they find ways to win. And like they might be finding all of these ways to win by like 3 against Oregon, 3 against Washington State, 2 against Oregon State, 7 against Utah, 10 against Southern California, 9 against Stanford. It's like and only 8 against Arizona State, where it's like all of these are like one score games or at the most 10-point games. They're not pounding anybody, but they're winning these games. And I don't know, maybe it's just like one of those things where it's like, when you look at an NFL team and you're like, well, they've won like X amount of games by one possession, that kind of smells fraudulent. Well, they Washington hasn't lost yet. So
But the thing is, I don't know if that's necessarily the same. This isn't like Minnesota Vikings, Kirk
right,
Cousins
no,
under center. I
right.
think just the reality is they're in a tougher conference, so they can't just show up and blow up a team by 40.
And you're right, but like why it's like to that point, it's like Oregon was in that same conference and yeah, they lost to Washington, but they beat the doors off of everybody else where it's like, wow, they look dominant in the top. Whereas like Washington's like edging their way by. I'm not trying to be the naysayer of Washington. I am trying to make sense of them, is what I am saying right now. I am trying to figure out
I get it.
what they're going to be. And that's why I think that this is a coin toss game where it's like, yeah, they could be Texas. But like, what if if a hypothetical situation happened where Texas goes up by like 3 touchdowns, where they throw 2 of them and they get a pick 6? It's like, oh, well,
I
maybe
think
we
in
had one
most
on.
situations, if that happens, a game is over. I just want to
But
say
yeah,
that right now.
but
But
like, yeah,
I'm not
but
saying either that Washington is magically going to show up and pound just absolutely dominate Texas here. I still think they win. I just, I, and I think they win, but
yeah,
it's
no,
still going to be a closer game. It's not going to be double digits or anything like that.
right,
I'm not going to make a score prediction here. This is a
right.
pure example when I say
Run
like
out
a
of yeah,
35-32. Just that
yeah,
that's not a score prediction.
no,
I
no,
am not making one. I'm giving
I'm
you an
not making one
example
either.
of a score where the difference is fewer than 10 points.
Yeah, I am basically saying I will not fall into the trap that I fell into earlier this year. I am not
No,
making
no
one.
more score. We do not predict games.
No,
We do
and I
not
will.
predict score. I mean, we predict games. I just said I think Washington wins,
Yeah,
but I'm not doing a score prediction.
yeah, I think I got too high on that Super Bowl pick that one year when I got lucky on the score. I'm not doing those score prediction. Not on this game. I might do it on some other games. I'm not doing it on this game. I refuse to do it.
No, because
Just of all the things I don't know, it's weird because again, Washington, they've always found a way to win. But like Texas beat them earlier, but they lost to Oklahoma
and
in
both
regular.
also have really two. They also both have really good quarterbacks.
Yeah, and those,
Michael
that's
Penix
the
Jr.
thing
is competing for the Heisman.
and that's a thing that's also, I think, kind of like in a way a factor. Like to me, like I can't get over the media day picture of Quinn Ewers at the actual table with the microphones and like nobody's there and he's looking over his shoulder and everyone is flooding Arch Manning. I don't know if that's going to be like a psyche problem but that just kind of, it kind of seemed
That's
weird.
more, I see that as bulletin board material for him. He's
Like,
the
yeah,
guy who was left in the dust for the fancy
yeah.
man product. And then this guy was the starting quarterback, and his only loss was a rival game against Oklahoma on a neutral site.
Yeah, and that's a great way to look at it too, because like it could very well be like if he goes out there and balls out like Jordan flu game or LeBron headband game against the Celtics or whatever, and he goes out there and balls, it's like, oh, it all makes sense now. Where it's like, but it's also kind of weird where the adversity is like where he's drawing it from is from his own team. It's almost like Jordan-esque where he's finding something to make up to get himself going. Now we're gonna see how he responds to that. So I do think it's gonna be a great game, so that the Sugar Bowl will be very exciting as well.
But we have to wait to find out. And by the way, just to go back to your comment on Liberty, I checked it. The game is tomorrow
Yeah,
against Oregon at 1 o'clock.
I
So who
looked up.
knows? Maybe we can make comments about Oregon too, since
Yeah,
Washington's in the playoff and they're not. I mean, there is a bit of a difference here with the fact that Washington has shown up twice against them. Washington absolutely is the better team, but you never know.
yeah, and it's like one of those things where you look at those teams and it's like it's weird because you could easily say, like, for example, Washington could beat Texas like out of the building, and then you're like, oh, Georgia could have been in, and then Alabama could have beat Michigan out the building. It's like, well, maybe the scandals had more things to do with Michigan, and then you could have been looking at it as, oh, Bama, Georgia, uh, Washington, Oregon, like that. Was it supposed to be that the whole time? I don't know, but we'll pivot over to this obscure thing I wanted to talk about, Harrison.
And I just want to say off the top of my head, I'm giving this segment a name. I'm calling it Josh's Pro Moment. Da 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 da.
Da, da,
Da,
da,
da,
da.
da.
So last night, the Dallas Cowboys played the Detroit Lions, and obviously the biggest thing with the Dallas Cowboys is can they beat good teams, especially on the road. This time they were at home. They had a lead against Detroit. They had what appeared to be a game-sealing interception with just over 2 minutes to go. Somehow Mike McCarthy, well, shocker, mismanaged the clock again for Dallas Cowboys. For the record, I'm not a fan of either of these teams. Just pointing out observations here. And Detroit gets the ball back, and they march down the field and score a touchdown. Now they're down by a point, and Dan Campbell, who I would run through a wall for, as many people have often said on social media, I concur with that statement. He decides to go for two, and they call this play very creative, by the way. Ben Johnson was in his bag last night, and it was a play to one of their offensive linemen. And the first thing that I actually thought of, it converted it. So Detroit converts it. There's 20 seconds to go. They think they've pretty much won the game. They're up by a point. My first thought was, well, I hope that the guy was eligible because, it's an offensive lineman catching the ball. So I'm assuming they probably, you probably go up there, talk to the official, make it clear that you're an eligible receiver. Well, then the flag comes out way after the play. Like the cameras have now panned to the celebration, and you don't even see the flag thrown. You just see the graphic come up on the screen. And they say that the offensive lineman for Detroit did not come in and register and announce himself as an eligible receiver. He did not, whatever the term is. I'm blanking on the term. Not register or check in, whatever it's called.
The point is, he's supposed to declare he's not lining up on the line. He's lining himself up to be whatever receiver he is supposed to be for that game.
Exactly.
Or for that play. Sorry. Of course, you don't do it for the whole game. That was just me misspeaking.
And for the record, is the offensive lineman's name was Taylor Decker. He was number 68. So they go back to like the replay, like long after, like they go on the post game show, they go on the replay. And Jared Goff is literally looking at Decker like, hey, go tell the official that you're going to be an eligible receiver. He goes over there. And he goes over there with Penei Sewell, who is over there for whatever reason. I don't know why he's over there. But he's over there, and the official is looking at Penei Sewell, who, by the way, is number 58. The numbers are important here, and I'll get to that in a minute. Penei Sewell, I think, is number 56 or 58. And then Decker is 68. Then there's this other lineman on Detroit. His last name is Skipper, and his number is 70. Now, Skipper is way out of the picture here. He is like standing about 15 to 20 feet away, whereas Penei Sewell and Taylor Decker are both right up at the official having this discussion. As Decker is approaching the official appears to run back to the line of scrimmage as if he already knows. So something there kind of seemed off to me, where it was like, maybe like Decker went up there and didn't get the words out before the official ran away, to which I'm thinking, what are we in a hurry for? This is a 2-point play. The clock is stopped, and the play clock doesn't start until the whistle is blown. So I don't know why there was any sort of rush here to begin with. That was the first flaw. It looked like they obviously interviewed the players after the game. What happened? Decker said he reported as an eligible receiver. The official said that number 70 reported as an eligible receiver, who was Skipper, who wasn't even in the picture, but he was the one that came onto the field. Now, according to the rules, you can have multiple offensive linemen or multiple non-eligible players check in as eligible receivers. That's not an issue. 70, who is Skipper, said he didn't report as eligible. 68, Decker said he did. But the official said it was the opposite. So they threw 2 flags on the play, one for illegal touching by Decker, 68, and then one on number 70, Skipper, who was illegally covered because they thought he was lined up illegally because they thought he was the registered as the receiver. And because of that, Detroit ends up losing the 2-point play. I want to make this clear. The explanation the rules official gave was that the official thought it was the other way around. How do we not get that clear? And the fact that they defend the official and say that the player needs to do more. What else is the player supposed to do in that situation? He went up there and did what he was supposed to do. The whole idea of players trying to make it nonchalant so the other team doesn't tip them off. Well, the official lets both teams know who's eligible, so that's out the window. So I've never bought into that whole thing. But the point is, it was completely mishandled in an event where there was no need to be in a rush, and it could have very well costed Detroit the game. And it, to me, Harrison, is one of the most bizarre calls I've ever seen. We can talk about the tuck rule until we're blue in the face, but I think what makes the tuck rule different from this situation is, one, obviously the stage was bigger because it was a playoff game, so that's why it carries more weight. But two, if you actually look in the rule book, the official got the call right. The outrage behind the tuck rule was it was almost like never called. It was like a lost rule in the rule book, so it was like a more of a consistency issue, not supposed to the right call. This was just a complete complete malfunction when it comes to just basic communication by the officials. And it was the explanation behind it was like he said type of thing, where it was like, well, somebody's lying here. Somebody's like that can't happen. And it's the same officiating crew that has been under the microscope for the NFL now all season long. I'm somebody that doesn't typically come on here and talk about officiating because quite frankly, you're never going to have a perfect game. It's like bad calls are part of the game. But it was, the explanations just made it seem more and more like inconceivable. I can defend an official for messing up a call or getting something wrong in certain circumstances, or then trying to make it right. But this was just like, you could have just stood there instead of taking off to the line of scrimmage and waited to actually hear what was going on instead of making an assumption. And that's what happened. Now, off of that, should Dan Campbell have probably still gone for 2 at the 7-yard line? No, probably not. I probably should have kicked the extra point.
No, that at that point I didn't understand.
But I understood, but I understood it. It wasn't the right decision, but I understood it. He was fired up. He wanted to
show we're gonna score no matter what.
Right, exactly. He got in, and that then they had the offside, so then it becomes more justifiable at the 3. But I don't understand how something like that can happen. That to me is one of the most abysmal calls I've ever seen. We've seen egregious PIs in the Saints Rams. We could have called that. I get it. I usually don't mind when the officials let the guys play. I've always said I'd rather an official let something go as opposed to intervene with a call that might be controversial. This wasn't even controversial. This was just the Detroit Lions were flat out robbed.
Yeah, it's because the issue with this one is that it's nothing that happened in the game necessary. It was like in theory the call's correct because based on their information that they might have had wrong, probably actually did have wrong. Yeah, this guy was illegally covered. This guy went out there. He's not supposed to. Technically correct based on what's officially on the paper. But also, it's kind of asinine to see when a game is completely lost because of something that happened on the sidelines. Just the lack of communications between something so basic costing the game. And I know this is not remotely the same thing at all. Remember the Egg Bowl like 4 years ago, where like the Ole Miss player pretended to pee like he was a dog, and it cost him like a few yards, so they missed the
That's
extra
sportsmanlike.
points.
Yeah, the unsportsmanlike conduct. At first, I'm like, where are you
Yes,
going with this? Take me down memory lane. I am not getting this. No, but I do. Continue.
it's the idea that it's like these things that don't actually affect the game at all. And I mean, like it kind of does because there was the miscommunication, but there needs to be some kind of way to be like, are you sure this is your eligible receiver? There has to be something where it's put officially documented somewhere outside of just going and letting them know. I also don't know how you if some who said 70, if 70 says he didn't go up there, where did the ref hear that? Where did someone didn't hear the other? It's confusing.
Right. So the rules official, and I didn't explain this part of it very well. I didn't get to this part really, but the rules official, as far as where did 70 come from? So 70 was the one that checked into the game. Like he subbed in. So the official saw him come in, and apparently throughout the game before he had checked in as an eligible receiver. So I think what happened was, and again, this is still on the official, this isn't on the Detroit Lions by any means, the official saw Skipper coming into the game when he was just coming in to be an offensive lineman for a substitution. And because he had checked in as an eligible receiver before, uh,
There might
it
have
gets
just been the assumption.
yeah, he assumed that because he was coming on, that he was the one. So when Decker is coming up to the official and the official runs away, that part of it now makes sense to me because it's like it seems like there's not much of a conversation being had here. Decker is going over there to tell him, but the official's kind of taking off
The
back.
ref's just kind of like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Like whatever you're gonna say to me, like whatever, like I got it by now, like I understand it. And really, you didn't have it, you didn't understand it in the slightest. 70 wasn't the eligible receiver, and that's what I think happened. The fact that because Decker was already on the field, Skipper was not. Skipper comes on the field, but then for him to explain that the conversation that was being had, the one that we have photographic evidence of, was where 70 said that he was an eligible receiver. If you look at the picture, 70's not talking to him. 70's like way off the camera. He's like 12 feet away. Whereas
Like, did the ref just kind of assume Decker was coming in to talk about 70?
yeah, like it just doesn't. And also, I don't know why.
Like, why would he do that?
That's the only question that I have is why on earth, like if 68 is coming in as the eligible receiver, why is Sewell over there talking to the official, and why is 70 running over as well? Like one guy, if it's one guy that's going to be the eligible receiver, if the play is only designed for one of these offensive linemen to be an eligible receiver, then why are the other guys not just lining up? So that part I also didn't get. So that whole thing just it was a complete it's weird that it happened the way it did, especially when Dan Campbell even said that, like, before the game, he explained it to the official how it was going to happen to a T, quote unquote. That's what he said. Like, he explained it all before the game even happened. Like, this was planned. This was planned before the game even started. This wasn't like, oh, we're going to go for it. We're going to just go for the win right now, go into the playbook and find something. They practiced this play. They let the officials know about this play, and it still went sideways. And I can completely understand why Dan Campbell would be frustrated and upset. And Mike McCarthy on the other side probably gets saved from blowing another game that he probably should. Like he should have won, but he blew another game, but he ended up winning that game. If that makes sense.
I think it just proves one thing. Detroit can have one nice thing per day.
Yeah.
The Pistons finally won which meant the Lions were not allowed to win. Detroit, two good things for the city and sports in one
Yeah,
day, not allowed. You
no.
get your wing stop. That's it.
Yeah, you got your wings stopped, but at what price, Detroit fans? At what price? Oh man, I mean,
We all know the Lions are the bigger team there, so it was a lot of pain while they ate their wings.
yeah, it's like, yeah, we would have taken, I think everyone in Detroit, I think almost everybody in Detroit would have taken the 29th loss in a row for the Detroit Pistons over the way that that happened. But I mean, the Wingstop thing, I mean,
I love how it's just become a meme the whole year. Like, Wingstop knowing they don't have to give out free food, or maybe there's a joke about how, oh, maybe they don't have to feed children or something. Like when the Red Sox had the promotion, I forget, oh geez, was it Boston Market? Where it's like, you don't act, the Red Sox hate children because they don't ever let that promotion have kids eat free.
pro baseball guy over here.
Makes me it makes me think about just promotions from like when I was a kid for this type of stuff. Like for context, I was a kid in the 2000s. Social media existed, but it was a novelty. Like the iPhone came out when I was 9 years old, or at least turning 9 years old. It was this, I remember looking at it and thinking, that's not a phone. That's not a cell phone. It doesn't flip, or it doesn't have like the little keypad on it.
Joke's on you. It doesn't flip. I don't want this.
Well, then what was it? Samsung who came and said phones can flip again, but still,
Yeah.
the point is, imagine the stuff in that era if everyone had a smartphone, everyone had social media as big as it was in like 2007, 2008. Because I'm going to lead to an example back then. The Tampa Bay Devil Rays had a promotion with Dunkin' Donuts. If they just won a game, you got a free donuts, no purchase necessary. I know. I used to go with my parents. We'd drive down the street to the local Dunkin' Donuts when the Devil Rays would win, get our free donuts. However, there'd be times, obviously, because this is when the Devil Rays would lose like 95 to 100 games. You would lose like 10 in a row. So they would go, because of their losing streaks, Dunkin' wouldn't have to give out free donuts. And imagine if this happened with the Pistons next year, if they just got good and the promotion stuck. The Devil Rays become the Rays in 08. They go on and suddenly they're winning 97 games. I remember going to a game where they won their eighth straight. 10-year-old me remembers seeing a sweep for eighth straight. And then the next day we went to Dunkin' Donuts for like whatever amount of days in a row. And I remember there being out of donuts. Just no donuts. They had to give us a free muffin because they had ran out of donuts and had to give somebody something for free. Imagine those jokes in the era of social media. The Dunkin' Donuts joke instead of the Wingstop joke. That could totally have been a thing easily.
Yeah, and I mean, there was when I was younger, and the Magic had a promo for Chick-fil-A, and it was, this was before the Stephen Curry era of jacking up threes, where like if your team hit 10 threes in a game, you could go to Chick-fil-A and get a free chicken sandwich or a free spicy chicken sandwich or whatever. And whenever like if you ever went to one of those games and they hit 10 threes, it was like, oh my gosh, it was like this never happens. And then the Magic got good and they led the league in 3-point shooting, and they are like, oh, we're gonna have to do something about this promo heading into next
Yeah,
year.
exactly. The promo ended in 2009 for Dunkin'. Suddenly it was a free donut with the purchase of a coffee.
Yeah. There we go. There it is.
And then the year after that, Duncan was no longer. Oh, I just smacked my own laptop. Good job, me. Next thing you know, I think it was like Chick-fil-A or someone replaced it. It was never the same again. It was never the same again. But yeah, things. Can you imagine when the Pistons start winning and it's just free wings for a week because they're locked into that deal for a year?
Hey, I mean, they could. I mean, they could win. Like they could win their next 2 games. I mean, they had the big losing streak, and I saw their upcoming schedule.
They
Like
can win their next 2 games.
they could. They could. Because like what I'm saying, I'm not saying they will. I'm saying they could because I looked at their schedule and they had like the 28-game losing streak. But when you looked at their upcoming 3 games, look at the Pistons can't get at least one of these 3 games. What are they doing? It took me a minute to pull it up, but like, yeah, they beat the Raptors the other night. who are not very good at all. But they also had games coming up against all right, New Year. They had the games coming up against the Rockets and the Jazz. Like they could beat the Rockets and they could beat the Jazz. I mean, yes, we know the Pistons just lost 28 in a row, but it's not like the Rockets and the Jazz or like juggernaut teams. And on the NBA, it's one of the trickiest. It's when we talk about forget predictions. The one thing I will never, ever, ever, ever do is predict the score of a regular season NBA game. I will never do it because I have no idea what's going to happen. I can predict a series. I can predict what team's going to win out of 7 games. I am not going to predict a random night in January, team versus team, who's playing, who's not, because it's so up in the air.
Yeah, look, you never know. What I just wanted to say was I thought it was funny because when you say they could win 2 games, was just because that's how bad the Pistons are. You're like, they might win a second game. They might win back to back.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves here.
No, let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I think that will do it for 2023 for the Awkward Sports Podcast. We want to thank everyone who has listened to our show since we have started earlier back in the summer this year. We are very excited for 2024, our first full calendar year that we will be doing this podcast. We appreciate all of the support so much. Josh, I just want to say it's been fantastic doing this with you so far. You're a good friend of mine. We go back a bit. We've been talking about doing a podcast, and it's finally here. Could not be more excited for what's to come.
Man, Harrison, we're going into the next year. We're not. This isn't the end. No, I'm just kidding. No, I like all the kind of.
This is the looking forward speech, man.
It's the looking forward speech, and here's to more egregious takes in 2024.
Here's some more. What the heck are these guys talking about? I'm Harrison. This is Josh. Happy New Year, everybody. We'll see you next year.